Margaret could hardly contain her excitement. Her son Andrew had just shared the wonderful news he was engaged. As a mother who had always dreamed of this moment, she felt a wave of joy and anticipation. The idea of helping plan her son's wedding filled her with pride. From the choice of flowers to the seating arrangements, Margaret envisioned herself deeply involved in every detail, ensuring that this day would be perfect not just for Andrew and his fiancée, but for the whole family. She pictured the laughter and conversations that would fill the house as everyone prepared for the celebrations. Margaret imagined herself helping select the perfect dress, sampling cake flavors, and offering advice on invitations. She loved the thought of sharing these special moments with Andrew, guiding him and his fiancée with care and love. Her heart swelled at the idea of being part of creating memories that would last a lifetime. Margaret had always believed that weddings were a reflection of family unity, love, and shared happiness. She looked forward to the joy of seeing her son step into a new chapter of life, feeling that her presence and support could make this milestone even more meaningful. Every detail mattered to her, from the decorations to the music that would play during the ceremony. She wanted to contribute her experience and ideas, ensuring that the wedding would not only reflect Andrew's and his fiancée's personalities, but also honor the family bonds they cherished. As she began brainstorming ideas and imagining the celebrations, Margaret felt a sense of purpose and belonging. She envisioned lively discussions with relatives, laughter echoing through the rooms, and the excitement of planning events that would bring everyone closer together. The thought of helping orchestrate such an important event filled her with pride and anticipation, reminding her of the love and commitment that weddings symbolize. Margaret's excitement was contagious. She shared her enthusiasm with friends and family, who eagerly offered their support and suggestions. With each conversation, her anticipation grew, and she felt more connected to this significant moment in her son's life. She knew that her involvement could help make the wedding a beautiful and memorable occasion for everyone. If you enjoy stories about family dynamics, heartfelt moments, and the joys and challenges of life's milestones, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring story about love, family, and the little twists that make life unforgettable. Join us on this journey as we explore Margaret's excitement, her dreams for the wedding, and the events that unfold next. Margaret had never imagined that the joy she felt over her son Andrew's engagement would be shadowed by tension within the family. Her enthusiasm for helping plan the wedding was genuine, rooted in love and a desire to contribute to a meaningful milestone in Andrew's life. But from the very beginning, Taylor, Andrew's fiancé, seemed to view her involvement as an intrusion rather than a shared celebration. What had started as polite suggestions from Margaret about seating arrangements, floral choices, and menu options soon became a source of friction. Taylor's responses were curt, her tone increasingly dismissive, and before long, she uttered the phrase that would echo painfully in Margaret's mind, "Stay in your lane." The words struck Margaret like a physical blow. She had anticipated that planning a wedding could involve differing opinions, perhaps a few debates over color schemes or guest lists, but she had not expected to feel sidelined, as if her care and investment were unwelcome. The tension between them grew each time Margaret tried to offer her perspective, with Taylor brushing off suggestions, redirecting conversations, or insisting that certain decisions were already made. What was meant to be a shared celebration of love began to feel like an invisible barrier had formed between Margaret and her son's soon-to-be wife. Margaret wrestled with a swirl of emotions, disappointment, confusion, and a quiet hurt that made her question whether she had overstepped, despite her intentions being rooted entirely in support and affection. Margaret's friends noticed the change in her demeanor during their regular gatherings. She would recount the latest wedding discussions with a mix of hope and frustration, speaking of the anticipation she had felt when Andrew first shared the engagement news, only to be met with resistance and dismissiveness from Taylor. Her friends listened and offered words of comfort, acknowledging that family dynamics could become complicated when a new person entered the fold. Margaret realized that she was experiencing a painful but common truth. The merging of families, even with the best intentions, could bring clashes of personalities and unspoken boundaries. As the weeks went by, the strain began to affect her interactions with Andrew as well. He loved his mother dearly, and she knew that, in his heart, he appreciated her insights and support, yet he often seemed caught in the middle, uncertain of how to assert his fiancée's wishes while honoring his mother's feelings. Margaret could see the subtle signs of stress in him, the quick glances, the hesitations before responding, the quiet sighs, and it added another layer of emotional weight. She understood that this was not about undermining her role in Andrew's life, but about navigating the delicate balance of respect, boundaries, and communication between two strong personalities. Despite the growing tension, Margaret tried to approach the situation with patience and empathy, reminding herself that weddings were not just about one person's vision but a union of two families and two lives. She chose her moments carefully, speaking softly and framing her suggestions in ways that showed she respected Taylor's choices, even when she silently disagreed. Yet, each time Taylor repeated the phrase "stay in your lane," Margaret felt a sting of exclusion, a reminder that her contributions, no matter how thoughtful or well-intended, were being minimized. She began to understand that this was not merely a matter of wedding planning, it was about identity, roles, and recognition within a newly forming family structure. One afternoon, while Margaret was reviewing floral options online, she hesitated before sending a link to Taylor, wondering whether her input would be accepted or rejected outright. When Taylor responded with a terse message dismissing the suggestion, Margaret felt a pang of sorrow and frustration that she could not easily shake. It was as if her desire to participate, to help, and to celebrate had been overshadowed by a boundary that felt rigid and unyielding. The emotional toll was subtle but persistent, manifesting in restless nights and moments of quiet reflection where she questioned how she could support her son without causing friction, and how she could honor both her feelings and Taylor's space. Margaret's determination to contribute positively never wavered, yet she realized that navigating this tension required more than enthusiasm. It demanded wisdom, restraint, and a careful understanding of interpersonal dynamics. She began to focus on finding ways to express her love and support without overstepping, discovering small gestures that could convey care without inciting conflict. Sometimes it was as simple as preparing a favorite snack for Andrew when he came home, or sharing a story from her own experiences that might inspire a creative idea for the wedding. Slowly, Margaret learned that influence did not always require direct control. Sometimes the most meaningful contributions were quiet, patient, and heartfelt, made with an awareness of boundaries and a respect for the autonomy of others. Through it all, Margaret's bond with Andrew remained strong, a constant anchor amid the turbulence of planning and interpersonal friction. She observed Taylor carefully, attempting to understand her perspective and motivations, realizing that dismissiveness might stem from insecurity, a desire for independence, or the natural challenges of integrating into a new family. Margaret's approach evolved, blending empathy with assertiveness, ensuring that her voice remained present without escalating tension. While the phrase "stay in your lane" had initially felt like rejection, over time it became a catalyst for Margaret to examine her intentions, refine her approach, and find ways to contribute that honored both her own desire to be involved and the newly forming dynamics of Andrew and Taylor's relationship. In this period of adjustment, Margaret discovered a resilience she had not fully appreciated in herself. The emotional hurt she felt was real, but it also revealed her capacity for patience, understanding, and adaptability. She learned that love and involvement in family milestones were not measured solely by the quantity of input or control but by the quality of presence, the sincerity of support, and the ability to navigate challenges with grace. Margaret's journey through tension, emotional pain, and careful negotiation became a testament to the complexities of blended family life and the enduring power of a mother's love in the face of unexpected obstacles. Margaret had always prided herself on her ability to remain poised in difficult situations, but the months leading up to her son Andrew's wedding tested her patience and composure in ways she had never anticipated. What had begun as simple excitement and eagerness to help had gradually transformed into a series of subtle, yet cutting reminders that her presence was often unwelcome. Taylor's repeated instructions to stay in her lane were not merely words. They carried an undertone of dismissal that Margaret could not ignore, leaving her to wrestle privately with feelings of humiliation, frustration, and disappointment. Each conversation about the wedding, each attempt to offer a suggestion, felt like a delicate negotiation between asserting herself and maintaining harmony, and Margaret found herself walking an emotional tightrope that demanded both restraint and resilience. There were mornings when she would sit quietly with her coffee, reviewing the latest messages and emails from Andrew and Taylor, feeling a pang of embarrassment at how her ideas had been brushed aside in front of others, or even worse, misrepresented. She had always believed that family should be a source of support and collaboration, yet here she was, navigating a terrain where her contributions were minimized, her experience overlooked, and her intentions questioned. The sting of public dismissal, whether at a family gathering or during a discussion with mutual friends, was particularly sharp. Margaret's face might have held the calm mask of composure, but inside, she wrestled with a whirlwind of emotions, questioning whether she was overreacting or simply standing up for her rightful place as a mother who cared deeply about her son's happiness. Despite the humiliation she felt, Margaret refused to let it dictate her behavior. She reminded herself constantly that maintaining dignity was essential, both for her own sense of self-respect and for her relationship with Andrew. In private, she processed her disappointment, sometimes through journaling her thoughts or confiding in close friends, using these outlets to vent frustration and regain clarity. She knew that yielding to anger or resentment would only escalate tensions, so she focused instead on careful observation, seeking to understand Taylor's perspective and anticipating where boundaries could be respected without sacrificing her own voice. Margaret began to appreciate the fine balance required in blended family dynamics, recognizing that influence often required patience, subtlety, and strategic empathy rather than overt involvement or confrontation. The wedding planning process itself became a canvas upon which Margaret's composure was tested repeatedly. From discussions about the guest list to the selection of decorations, every interaction carried the potential for conflict or rejection. Taylor's responses could be abrupt, curt, or laced with a quiet superiority that suggested Margaret's ideas were naive or irrelevant. Each exchange was a reminder that the family's harmony rested not solely on affection but on careful navigation of unspoken rules and social cues. Margaret learned to temper her instincts to intervene directly, instead offering suggestions in a manner that acknowledged Taylor's autonomy, framing ideas as options rather than instructions, and listening intently even when she disagreed internally. This approach demanded patience and emotional discipline, yet over time, it became a method through which Margaret could remain involved without causing undue friction. There were moments, however, when the weight of humiliation pressed heavily on her heart. A casual remark during a family dinner or a dismissive email could trigger a rush of memories where her expertise and enthusiasm had been overlooked or undermined. She recalled times when her ideas had been subtly criticized in front of others, moments where her emotional labor in organizing and preparing had been invisible, and the quiet disappointment of seeing Andrew caught between loyalty to his fiancée and appreciation for his mother. Margaret acknowledged the sting of these experiences, allowing herself to feel the pain without letting it define her interactions. She cultivated an inner dialogue of resilience, reminding herself that her intentions were pure and that her love for Andrew remained the guiding force through every challenge. In this period, Margaret also discovered the nuanced art of selective engagement. She learned when to speak and when to step back, recognizing that influence was not always measured by vocal participation but by the subtle impact of thoughtful, supportive actions. She offered small gestures that communicated care without confrontation, preparing Andrew's favorite meals, arranging a thoughtful surprise for Taylor to ease stress, or quietly coordinating with family members who were receptive to her ideas. Each action, though often unseen or unacknowledged, allowed Margaret to assert her presence in the wedding preparations in a manner that preserved her dignity while still contributing meaningfully. As the weeks progressed, Margaret's composure became a quiet testament to her strength and adaptability. She realized that humiliation and disappointment were not defeats but challenges that demanded introspection, strategic empathy, and emotional intelligence. By maintaining grace under pressure, she preserved the delicate balance of family dynamics, allowing Andrew to experience the wedding planning process without unnecessary conflict while still asserting herself in subtle, meaningful ways. The experience reshaped her understanding of influence within family structures, teaching her that respect, patience, and careful navigation of emotional landscapes could wield more power than overt control or confrontation. Through every slight, dismissal, and challenging interaction, Margaret's commitment to grace and resilience remained steadfast. She learned that navigating complex relationships was not about winning arguments or asserting authority but about maintaining integrity, offering support with empathy, and finding ways to contribute that honored both her own perspective and the autonomy of others. The emotional strain was real, yet it became a catalyst for personal growth, fostering a deeper understanding of patience, emotional regulation, and the enduring strength of maternal love. In the end, Margaret emerged from this experience with her composure intact, her presence meaningful in ways that transcended acknowledgement, and her love for Andrew unwavering, illustrating the quiet, often invisible courage required to navigate family life with dignity and poise. Margaret had spent countless hours reflecting on the countless moments of tension and subtle dismissals that had colored the months leading up to Andrew's wedding. Each encounter with Taylor, each curt remark, and each repeated instruction to stay in her lane had etched itself into her mind, leaving a mix of disappointment, hurt, and a growing awareness that her role in the wedding was being marginalized in ways that no amount of patience or diplomacy could fully remedy. The internal struggle she had endured balancing her love for Andrew with the necessity of preserving her dignity had finally reached a point where inaction no longer felt like a viable option. She realized that while her intentions had always been rooted in support and care, continuing to provide financial backing under conditions where her contributions were dismissed would only perpetuate a pattern of disrespect and diminish her own sense of self-worth. The decision she faced was difficult, yet it became increasingly clear that asserting her boundaries was essential, not as an act of confrontation, but as a statement of self-respect and personal integrity. The act of withdrawing the majority of the wedding fund she had carefully saved over the years was not one of spite or retaliation. It was an intentional, measured response that allowed her to reclaim control over a situation that had often left her feeling powerless. Margaret retained a symbolic portion of the fund, a conscious gesture to honor the familial bond and the significance of the upcoming union. But the bulk of her savings was now firmly back under her stewardship. As she moved through the familiar motions of closing accounts and transferring funds, there was a sense of quiet empowerment that accompanied each step. It was not the thrill of rebellion that energized her, but rather the clarity that came from taking decisive action aligned with her values. This withdrawal was a declaration of boundaries, an affirmation that her contributions would no longer be taken for granted, and a gentle lesson in accountability that extended beyond financial matters into the broader dynamics of respect and mutual consideration within the family. In the days that followed, Margaret experienced a profound mixture of relief and apprehension. On one hand, there was the satisfaction of reclaiming agency, of no longer allowing her generosity to be overshadowed by disregard or dismissive attitudes. On the other hand, she could not ignore the potential fallout, the uncomfortable conversations, the tension that might arise between her and Taylor, and the delicate task of explaining her decision to Andrew without casting blame or igniting unnecessary conflict. Margaret approached each interaction with careful deliberation, choosing words that conveyed her love and support for Andrew while also making clear that the way she had been treated could not continue unchecked. She framed her decision not as a punishment but as a natural consequence of the boundaries she needed to establish for her own emotional well-being, recognizing that teaching respect sometimes required taking firm, deliberate steps. As the wedding planning continued, the dynamic between Margaret and Taylor shifted subtly but unmistakably. While Taylor was initially taken aback by the withdrawal, Margaret's composed explanation and consistent demeanor allowed the situation to unfold without escalating into outright conflict. The symbolic portion of the fund she retained served as a bridge, demonstrating that her actions were not rooted in anger but in measured self-respect. Margaret's quiet confidence and unwavering commitment to her principles began to command a new level of acknowledgement, even if grudgingly, from Taylor, and her influence was no longer rooted in unquestioned financial support but in the integrity and boundaries she maintained. This shift changed the tone of their interactions, gradually replacing curt dismissals with tentative consideration, as Taylor adjusted to the realization that Margaret's involvement could no longer be taken for granted or minimized. Margaret also found that reclaiming control over the majority of the wedding fund offered an unexpected opportunity for introspection and growth. With the financial leverage removed from the situation, she reflected on what truly mattered: her relationship with Andrew, the health of the family dynamic, and the preservation of her own dignity. She recognized that her love for Andrew had never depended solely on material contributions, and that her role as a mother encompassed far more than monetary support. It was about guidance, presence, and emotional investment. By asserting her boundaries in this tangible way, Margaret was able to reclaim not just her finances, but also a sense of autonomy and agency that had been eroded by months of subtle dismissal and tension. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Margaret's decision reverberated in subtle ways throughout the family. Conversations became more measured, and while the underlying tensions did not disappear entirely, there was a newfound respect that shaped interactions. Margaret discovered that boundaries, when enforced with calmness and consistency, could foster understanding rather than resentment, and that self-respect often commanded more influence than overt attempts to control or intervene. She continued to support Andrew in meaningful ways, providing guidance and assistance where it was welcomed, and cherishing moments of genuine connection that reinforced the enduring strength of their bond. Ultimately, the act of withdrawing the majority of the wedding fund became a pivotal turning point in Margaret's journey, one that underscored the importance of self-respect, assertiveness, and emotional clarity. It was a demonstration of the delicate balance between love and boundaries, a lesson in the power of deliberate action in the face of dismissal, and a reaffirmation of her own worth as a mother, individual, and participant in her family's life. Margaret emerged from this chapter not only with a restored sense of agency but with a deeper understanding of how to navigate complex relationships, proving that dignity and love could coexist, even in the most challenging circumstances, and that sometimes the most profound expressions of care come hand in hand with the courage to assert oneself. As the weeks turned into months, the story of Andrew's wedding unfolded in ways none of the family could have predicted. Despite the initial excitement and anticipation, the planning process had become increasingly chaotic, fueled by Taylor's insistence on controlling every aspect of the event and her decision to hire a so-called expert wedding planner whose promises proved far too good to be true. Margaret, having withdrawn the majority of the wedding fund and retained only a symbolic portion, had taken a step back from the turmoil, observing from a distance with a mixture of concern and quiet resolve. She had learned through experience that attempting to assert influence in an environment where her input was consistently dismissed would only lead to frustration and disappointment. Instead, she embraced a posture of patience, allowing events to unfold while maintaining her own peace and dignity. Inevitably, the consequences of Taylor's choices began to surface. The wedding planner, whose credentials were largely fabricated and whose recommendations often led to logistical nightmares, created situations that no one could ignore. Venues were double-booked, vendor contracts fell through, and hidden fees appeared with alarming frequency, placing undue stress on Andrew and, surprisingly, even on Taylor herself. As the chaos escalated, Margaret watched with a steady calm, her earlier feelings of humiliation and disappointment replaced by a sense of quiet vindication not born of malice, but of the understanding that actions carry consequences, and that respect cannot be forced. Taylor's insistence on complete control had created a situation that highlighted the importance of humility, foresight, and collaboration, lessons she seemed only now willing to confront. Meanwhile, Margaret found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken over the past months. She recognized that her initial desire to be involved in the wedding had come from a place of love and excitement, but that her expectations had clashed with realities she could not change. By withdrawing the bulk of the wedding fund, she had not only safeguarded her financial resources but also reasserted her personal boundaries, creating space for her own growth. Margaret realized that empowerment did not always come from confrontation or correction. Sometimes it came from stepping back, observing, and choosing which battles to fight and which to leave behind. She began to cultivate a deeper sense of peace, finding satisfaction in her ability to maintain composure and clarity amid the chaos, and in the knowledge that her influence on Andrew's life remained intact in ways that truly mattered. As the wedding date approached, the atmosphere shifted subtly but meaningfully. Taylor, now grappling with the consequences of her choices, had begun to show glimpses of humility, recognizing that guidance and collaboration were essential components of success. Margaret's role, though no longer financial or directive, had evolved into that of a quiet mentor and emotional anchor. She offered Andrew advice when asked, shared gentle encouragement, and served as a model of grace under pressure. The symbolic portion of the wedding fund that she had retained ensured her continued involvement in a meaningful yet controlled capacity, a reminder that her contributions were not measured solely in dollars but in the wisdom and presence she offered. Through this experience, Margaret discovered the profound strength that comes from self-respect, patience, and the ability to observe and understand without needing to dominate or dictate outcomes. The wedding itself, though not without hiccups, ultimately proceeded with moments of genuine joy and celebration. Margaret's decision to step back had created space for others to take responsibility, make mistakes, and learn, while also allowing her to remain a steady and supportive presence. She felt a renewed sense of empowerment, understanding that true influence is often exercised through observation, guidance, and example rather than control. The emotional relief of no longer being caught in a cycle of dismissal and frustration allowed her to savor moments of connection with Andrew and other family members, and to witness the unfolding of life's events with clarity and compassion. In the aftermath, Margaret reflected on the lessons learned, that self-respect is non-negotiable, that boundaries are essential for emotional well-being, and that the courage to step back can be as powerful as the courage to act. She realized that her life did not need to revolve around others' misjudgments or attempts at control, and that true peace comes from maintaining integrity while allowing the world to move at its own pace. Margaret embraced her own path with renewed confidence, finding wisdom in the understanding that her influence mattered most when grounded in calm observation, empathy, and steadfast principles. She had transformed her initial frustration and disappointment into a journey of personal growth, empowerment, and enduring peace. Thank you for joining us in exploring Margaret's journey of resilience and self-respect. If you found value in this story, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel and stay updated with more inspiring stories of personal empowerment and life lessons. Your support helps us continue to bring meaningful content that highlights growth, wisdom, and the power of staying true to oneself.